All right, well, I'm going to get things kicked off. Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome to our fourth webinar of the Outdoor Recreation Knowledge Exchange webinar series. My name is Haley Sorg. I am the J. Kemmerer Worth Institute Extension Educator with the University of Wyoming, and I will be your moderator today. This webinar is a series in partnership between the Colorado State University Extension, the Colorado Office of Outdoor Recreation, the University of Wyoming Extension, J. Kemmerer Wyoming Outdoor Recreation, Tourism, and Hospitality Worth Institute, and the Wyoming Office of Outdoor Recreation. There's a lot of really great people coming together to make this all happen today. We are working together to enhance outdoor recreation across both of our states and our communities and throughout the entire United States. We've had a lot of registrants for this webinar series. We have almost 21 different states registered, so very excited about that. Thank you all for being here today. I am also joined by my co-host and co-creator of this webinar series, Guinevere Nelson, who is the Douglas County Extension Director for Colorado State University. Today, Guinevere is going to be doing a lot of our background IT, all of the great stuff. We love having her here for all that. She will also be moderating our Q&A chat feature. So as you can see at the bottom lower part of your screen, there should be a Q&A feature as well as the chat box. So please feel free to use either one of those. Please feel free to use this feature throughout the webinar series to ask either Guinevere, myself, or any of our panelists questions throughout the way. She will also be providing links to a Mentimeter polls, which we will be asking for all of you attendees to fill out so we can gather some more information from you all as well throughout the webinar. But today we're really excited to jump in. We are going to be discussing lessons learned from communities and organizations across both Wyoming and Colorado. We're excited to dive into these stories, successes, and even the challenges faced by communities and organizations as they work to enhance outdoor recreation in their communities. Throughout these case studies and insights shared by all of these great industry leaders, we will uncover some strategies that worked well, lessons learned along the way, as well as key factors that have contributed to their success. Things like community engagement, securing funding, and ensuring long-term sustainability. We will also be able to explore how they got started, giving you practical ways to apply to your own outdoor recreation projects as you're going on. So Guinevere, if you wouldn't mind sharing the screen, we'll go into our agenda for the day. Awesome. Yep, we can see it. And you can pop right over to the agenda. Awesome. Great. Thank you, Guinevere. So this is our agenda today. We have a lot of really great panelists to go through, as well as some questions and that Q&A section at the end. So when you all registered for this webinar, you were asked if you had any questions for our panelists. Those questions have been recorded and will be answered toward the end of our webinar today. As you can see, we will start out with a polling question for all of you to answer and then move into our first panelist presentation. So like I said, there's the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So as we are going through the presentation today, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A and we will gather those to answer during the Q&A section of the webinar. You can go to the next slide. And I want to mention that we have one more upcoming webinar in this series. So on February 13th, we will have panelists to discuss the future of outdoor recreation and those opportunities to make it a resilient part of our communities. So on the lower part of the screen, there is a QR code. If you are not registered for that webinar, please register for that. As well as following that QR code, it will take you to our webpage where you can find recordings of all past webinars. And so we know that this is the last webinar in this series that we're doing, but don't worry, we are not done. Many of you have talked with us about some different topics and ideas you have for future webinars. So we will be getting those going sometime in the future. So please make sure that you follow the CSU Extension social media pages as well as the UW Extension social media pages and keep up with our webpage as we get ready for the next session of our webinar series. So just keep a lookout for that. You can go to the next slide, Guinevere. I am so excited to introduce our esteemed panelists here today who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in these lessons learned. First off, we have Mark Tesoro with Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails. We have Mick Daniel. Oh, I apologize. I see that there was a typo there, Mick. With the San Luis Valley Great Outdoors, Brad Bauer with the Sheridan Community Land Trust, and Sarah Ott with the City of Aspen. So you can go to the next slide. So here is our first interactive poll, and I know Guinevere here shortly will get a link dropped into the chat as well, but please feel free to scan this QR code or use that link. As participants, we want to ask you, what do you hope to get out of this webinar? And so we'll give you a second to get onto that, but please feel free to fill this out. This will be open throughout the next section of our presentation, so please feel free to answer our question. And you can go to the next slide when you're ready. And so our first panelist is Mark Tesoro, with the president of Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails. Unfortunately, we were running into some Zoom technical difficulties with our videos, so we did not have, Mark had a great video to be able to share with you all today, but we have not been able to get it to come through via Zoom. So we will be sharing this information afterwards as well, so you guys can all make sure that you are watching that video. We can also drop a link into the chat with the link to the YouTube video as well. But with that, I will hand it over to you, Mark, to give us a little bit more information about Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails.
Thank you, Haley. Everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so much appreciate the offer from Haley and Guinevere to present Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails, also called SWOT. I'm sure many of you have heard that before: strength, weakness, opportunity, threats, but I kind of co-opted that for our project. So SWOT, Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails, is an economic development project for the communities of Southwest Wyoming. Back in 2019, early 2020, I took an idea to the Economic Development Commission here in Uintah County. The idea of connecting our communities with a series of motorized trails between our small communities, so that somebody could bring in an ATV, a side-by-side, a dirt bike, anything like that, and ride between our communities and stay in maybe a hotel, eat in a restaurant, go to a convenience store, gas up, and then hit the trail again. And you know, my wife and kids and I were big mountain bikers, spent a lot of time down in Moab, and I would always see these vehicles down there running around, and all the economic activity surrounding those. And I just thought, you know, that may be something that we could do in Southwest Wyoming. You know, invite riders to come into our communities and spend money. And so I took this idea to them and was hoping that they would do something with it. And unfortunately, they just said, "Why don't you do something with it?" And so I kind of realized, all right, maybe this is, you know, something that I should undertake. After that, I put together just a small working group with a few people that I knew from here in Evanston. Senator Wendy Schuler, she was one person that I approached, and then Rick Schuler, who was the district ranger from the Wasatch Uintah National Forest, just outside of Evanston. So I approached both of them and I said, "What do you think about this idea of connecting communities with motorized trails?" And Rick was very excited about it. He said, "You know, this is something that I've wanted to work on for many years." There was already 350 miles of trails in up in the Uintahs, about 30 miles outside of Evanston. And you know, when I had talked to him about it, I'd worked on a scenic byway project with him 25 years ago, and we'd been in good touch ever since then. But I took this idea to him and he said, "Yeah, I'd love to be involved." So the three of us kind of started putting a working group together. And since accessibility into and out of the communities was a key point, we started working with the city of Evanston and with the other communities that are kind of surrounding our area within about 45 minutes away. Through Rick's contacts with the State Trails Office, he was able to bring some of their members to some of our meetings, and they really liked what we were proposing and thought could be something that could be done, you know, possibly statewide. And so, since the accessibility into and out of the communities was paramount, we started working on a bill for the legislative session in order to try and make access available for these vehicles. That first year in 2020, we had the bill go to the session, and unfortunately, it kind of got shot down. We lost in a 4-4 vote. but we turned around and retooled for the next year. We had many communities come on board during that time. So there was 11 communities that have since signed on to allow off-road vehicles into their communities with the state of Wyoming's $15 off-road sticker, similar to the snowmobile sticker, just placed on there, sold through local vendors throughout the state. But this allows vehicles that aren't being able to be registered in surrounding states like Colorado, for example, to come into Wyoming and ride. Some states, they're able to apply for and get a license to put on their machines, but some states there are not. So we were able to work with the legislature in order to get that done. That second year that we took 2 bills back to the legislature through our partnership with the Wyoming State Trails Office and with WYDOT, and those 2 bills, both of them were committee bills. The committee bills were Senate File 17 and House Bill 42, and one of them was a rights-of-way bill to allow these vehicles on state highways or portions of state highways into and out of communities. And then the other one was a safety bill, so that would bring in these vehicles into alignment with other safety standards that are required for vehicles on the highway, such as like blinkers, mirrors, insurance, license plates. So both of those bills, we had a tremendous amount of traction going into the legislature that year. Some of the partners that we've had at the table with us throughout this whole process have been, of course, the legislators, but city councils, county commissioners, Game and Fish, the BLM, the Forest Service, National Park Service, wildlife advocacy groups, weed and pest. I mean, we've really tried to make a concerted effort to bring many stakeholders, any stakeholders that we could think of, to the table for this project. Since that project got off since that part of the project got off the ground, we were able to enroll 4 new communities this past year. Rock Springs has come on board, and they've allowed their city streets to be enrolled in with the city ordinance as well. And then Granger and Superior are 2 other ones that have come on board. The counties that have approved OHV use on the county road system, Uintah County, where I'm at, they have about 23 roads enrolled into the state's trail system. Fremont County, all of their roads. Sweetwater County did all of their roads in the spring of this year. Let's see, Lincoln County, all of their roads, Carbon County. So really kind of a sweeping movement across the state to allow these vehicles to come in and ride. And one thing that I've said many times to the legislature and to the different meetings that I presented at is that, there's a tremendous amount of economic benefit that comes in from the snowmobile industry into Wyoming. But typically those machines are one rider, one machine. Whereas these machines, the OHVs that are on the roadways now, and many of you have probably seen them on roadways, many of these hold 4 people, 6 people. They can hold a whole family. So it's almost like boating on dirt. And we are just creating scenic byways on dirt for people to come and ride. In Southwest Wyoming, there's a tremendous amount of history that has happened through our handful of communities. The westward migration, everyone coming to see or passing through on the Oregon Trail, headed to the west, has come through our small communities. So there's a lot of history that can be seen, whether it's historic Fort Bridger, the Piedmont Kilns, the Fossil Butte National Monument that's just to our north. And one thing I'll add on Fossil Butte National Monument is they haven't allowed these vehicles on the national monument for upwards of 20 years. And that was done through a compendium that was written by a national parks superintendent many years ago. And so we worked with the county commissioners, the city council, and many stakeholders, including our DC contingency of Barrasso at the time, Liz Cheney, and Harriet Hageman and Cynthia Lummis. And we were able to get a letter drafted to the National Park Service, and they changed their direction on that, and they're allowing those vehicles in there. They haven't formally announced that yet, but that was done last year. And so, really a way to, if we're bringing riders into this region to see, they've got to be able to access some of these historical points. So, that work with Fossil Butte National Monument, tremendous stakeholder work done in that. But really, as an economic benefit to the communities, there are our surrounding states, Colorado, Idaho, South Dakota, who have done these types of trails projects connecting communities, and it's been a huge benefit to those states. And we're just a little far behind in Wyoming. We haven't, there's a lot of places to ride in Wyoming, but nothing necessarily that connects the communities together so that people can bring their money into the communities. And this is really a way to do that. And that's why the state has gotten on board with it. That's why all of the communities that we've approached have been very receptive and have gotten on board with it. From the work that I did early on with SWAT, the governor's office reached out and asked me to be on the tourism board. So I've served on the tourism board since 2021, and just been a tremendous opportunity to move this whole project forward. The interesting thing is that it's something that was done at a grassroots level. It's never something that I thought, hey, I could move this whole project forward on my own. We have a great board here in Evanston, including like law enforcement officers, the chief of police, the local town mayor from Kemmerer was on our board, a senator's on our board, business owners. So really bringing all types of grassroots stakeholders to the table to be involved. And I think that's one thing that's really helped move the needle, is that, this isn't just a little nonprofit saying, hey, we want to do this on county roads and state highways. This is really a collaborative effort between all of the communities to get this really moving. I'm not sure where I'm at on time, Haley. So maybe just a quick plug. Our website, if you want to check it out, is rideswat.com. And the State of Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Office has put together some really nice video for us if everyone wants to check that out. And a lot of great information on that website as well. So just looking to continue moving across the state, adopting new ordinances in communities, connecting, like the state parks and state trails office have said, we'd like to see dirt trails from one end of the state to the other.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark, for telling us a little bit more about SWAT. I know living in Wyoming and working in Wyoming, it's been so amazing to see the work that you guys have been doing and really how you are connecting communities in such an impactful way. So thank you so much for sharing. Again, we're sorry that we could not get the videos to share, but we did drop the link in the chat, and these videos will also be made available after as well. So with that, I am going to pass it on over to Mick. And Guinevere, if you wouldn't mind sharing the presentation again, because I know Mick had a few slides as well. Mick also had a video, and so I'm going to drop that into the chat.
And I think I can share it now. I actually figured it out.
Okay, if you want,
I'm going to give it a try, just because I'm risky that way.
All right, we'll give it just 1 second, Mick. We are going to open up our second interactive poll. So this is a question that we are asking on Menti. So please log back into that Menti and answer this second question. It is, what issues are you facing in your community, and ranking them on 1 to 5. We have things like housing, workforce, development, training, and retention, economic diversity, etc. So make sure that you jump into that Menti and are answering those questions as well. But with that, Mick, if you would like, try and share your video. We'll see if it can work.
Interesting. Yep, not going to work.
Not going to work. Oh, darn.
It was really funny because I looked it up and it just said you needed to click the share sound, but it won't allow me to click it. So
darn.
Yeah, so it's just some kind of magic box there for some reason. But that's fine. I'm pretty good at talking. So I think I can pull that off. So talk a little bit about San Luis Valley Great Outdoors, since I don't have the video introduction. But we're a 501c3 operating throughout the Great San Luis Valley. We're probably best known for Great Sand Dunes National Park. We're about 8,000 square mile valley, and about just only 50,000 people in that 8,000 square miles, and about 17 communities. Some of those communities are more developed than others, but SLV Go really has been working to develop outdoor recreation in our rural communities. And to be honest, our focus has really been about the people who live there, because when you just have 50,000 people, if they're not using the resource that you help create, there'll be a big part of the year that it's not seeing traffic and getting use. And what we like to call the side effect of that has definitely been tourism. We see tourists come in and start utilizing those resources. Guinevere, next slide. So the big piece of what I was going to talk about with the video, and you all have a chance to watch it afterwards, is the recreation economies for rural communities process. And this was actually the second time that we had done a process like this one. The first one was called Revitalize the Rio, and it was in Alamosa. But I wanted to just talk about how we've gone about doing these large community processes to determine outdoor recreation resource development. And that was a little bit what the video was talking about, like from the community's voices. But the important thing for us has always been to find a facilitator. We consider ourselves part of our communities. And while we do a lot of facilitation as a nonprofit and working in it, we want to be in those processes with the community members that are there. And the first time we did that, we actually did it with Trust for Public Land and Civic Canopy. And the second time, the Recreation Economies for Rural Communities program was actually through the EPA. It was a technical assistance grant through the EPA. And so they came and did the facilitation for Monte Vista. And again, we did that, and that's worked really good for us because it allows us to not be the leaders during that process. We certainly go into that process knowing that we are going to carry the brunt of the work that came from brainstorming, but we, again, wanted to be part of that process. Next slide. When we talk about the communities in the San Luis Valley, I mean, we are really the definition of rural. It really doesn't get much rural. Our largest community is only 10,000 people. And so the rest of the communities that we're really working in Monte Vista in particular, really just 3,500 people live there. And so why do rural communities need outdoor recreation, right? Like we've identified all these opportunities, tourism being a big one that people like to talk about a lot. But, really, it should be a fundamental right to have access to the outdoors, have a place where kids can ride bikes. You can go for a walk with your dog and not get threatened by getting run over on a gravel road, or not know if you're allowed to be where you currently are. Some of our communities certainly have public land that backs right up next to them. But actually, the far majority are kind of isolated from public land, and it could be a 45-minute drive to get to a trail where you might be able to go for a walk or ride a bike. As we've grown and built more infrastructure, that has become less and less travel time for our communities. But that's an important thing to keep in mind. As I talk about kind of moving that community into the process, you want to make sure that you're also bringing people who can help you move that process forward. It sounded like for Mark, he was really engaged with the state of Wyoming and in helping getting that developed. I think a lot of times here in the San Luis Valley, we've reached out to private funders and some of our state funders as well, like GOCO or the Colorado State Trails Committee, to work with them. But you want to invite them to those processes in the community. It gives them a chance to hear those stories firsthand and be involved and engaged in the process. And we've just found that a really effective tool. Like, we're going to tell that story after the process is done. But if they got to be there and actually see the community working on those ideas and coming up with the concepts, those funders are way more bought in, and the sell is easier moving forward. Next slide. So, lasting partnerships. I think SLV Go, we had some success early on just with our own formation and in several of our communities. But what's really been successful for us is partnerships. The more partners we have tied into a funding ask, the more successful it seems to be. It seems to indicate like buy-in to the funders. Again, whether that's state, federal, or a private funder as well. Like when they see a lot of entities engaged in it, that's a big deal. For us, we're very fortunate to have a lot of public land here. As I said, it's mostly on the outskirts of the valley and not in the center. But it's certainly been the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, Colorado State Lands, our department or our CPW officers or Division of Wildlife officers have been incredible partners to work with and show up and are active in that, so that we're making good decisions about where we're putting this infrastructure and not creating impact on the wildlife. But those partnerships they kind of continue to move from community to community. And so now, as we've moved out of Alamosa and moved into Monte Vista and now Saguache, like those partners are coming with us to be engaged in those conversations. And so growth and development like that, like Mark was talking about, it's just really important to have those long lasting partnerships. Next slide. In action, I think a lot of times you get these technical assistant grants, or you have some level of community outreach and process. And there's sometimes this idea of like, okay, who's going to now carry this forward? And, in the San Luis Valley, getting left with like our small towns, like they often don't have the capacity to really move a big rec project like that forward. And so they're obviously a critical partner in their town, but the capacity to do it, the extra people to make it happen. And so that's really where San Luis Valley Great Outdoors has come in handy throughout the San Luis Valley. But we've kind of developed this idea that, swing for the low hanging fruit. Like you're going to get some really awesome big project ideas. We have one of the big ideas that came out of the Monte Vista work is a $12 million paved pathway that will go over one of our ditches that comes through town. And while we're working hard on that project, even if we were to get to funding, it would be years out. What we did find from the community was that there was a real interest in having an archery range. And so we worked with CPW to develop an archery range just outside of town. And the town recreation committee jumped in and worked with the school districts to start getting kids out and teaching archery. It's a really easy win. And now we have archery programs in Monte Vista, and it's getting kids outdoors on a piece of CPW land, state wildlife area. And, CPW was very fortunate to have funding for archery ranges. So that was an easy win, low hanging fruit that shows the community that the work that they talked about and were engaged in is successful, right? Now we can begin to work on a $12 million project, because we have some pressure off of us to show that the work was successful. I think big projects, they're definitely more sexy, but they can take a lot of time to pull off and a lot of money. And so find that thing that you can make happen quickly and make it happen so that they, the naysayers, the people who are like, well, that's a waste of time, can actually see something come out of it. And then the formula. Next slide. So the formula. We've just found this to be good for us. Again, we're working through 17 communities down here. And as 5 years ago, I would say they weren't lining up. These days it's changed a lot. Like we're in demand, and we have a schedule that's so full that we won't even get to everything in 2024, and that's a great place to be. But each of these initiatives has started with some champion in their community. I live outside of between Monte Vista and Del Norte, and most of our staff, are spread out between Alamosa and Monte Vista. So we do live in some of these communities, but we can't live in the majority of them. And so we can't be the champion for the people who live there. And we really need those champions to come forward, with this idea, whether it's a trail or a park, a shade structure, fishing infrastructure, archery range, gun range, proposals for motorized access to, the U.S. Forest Service trails, whatever it may be. We need somebody who's really going to be that champion in the community. And then we typically go for a facilitator. Like I said, we really like to be in the process and not outside of the process, because obviously we carry ideas too when we want to make it about the community, but it's nice for us to be engaged with the community and the work and the conversations, and bring a third party in to handle that. Big public meetings. From a funding standpoint, I can't, when people see 100 people come together to have a conversation about the outdoors, like that carries a lot of weight and impact. And when it's the voice of the community that's really coming from it, which is why I wanted to share the video, it really does speak to the funders, and they're able to really get behind that. When it's Mick and Mick has a good idea for a trail, the funders are like, oh, it's that Mick guy again, like talking about the San Luis Valley. But we really need those voices from the people. And you know what? It's democracy in action, which is really awesome. And it brings all sides together with a central focus on trying to do something good. While you're in those big meetings, make sure you're finding some way to keep people involved in the process moving forward. If you lose them, it's going to be harder to get them back. So we tend to break into subcommittees, have them engaged in one of those projects. They really become our guiding voices in that. So it's been so critical for us. And then also make sure, like, once you have the archery program set up, or you get that $12 million grant, make sure you have an opportunity to bring people back together and celebrate and talk about the successes that are happening, because a lot of times people don't actually know that their voice was heard, and that was what really influenced moving that project forward. They just don't make the connection. And again, find funders that like the projects and ideally get them there, so that they really begin to hear what you have going on. And then lastly, fund and develop. Make sure that's coming from the community. Like, no matter how much I want more mountain bike trails, community's not mountain bikers, they're not going to use it, right? So make sure that they are there with their ideas, and then fund and develop for them, and then just enjoy it, right? Like, it's really incredible. Like, we've got enough infrastructure on the ground that I can't get on everything every year now, but it's really cool. There's a trail that's on my way to work just behind a big R and a bank in Monte Vista, a little piece of Monte Vista city property that just wasn't being utilized for anything. And, we put a 1.5 mile walking trail on it. And sometimes it's just nice in the morning as I'm coming into work to have a stroll around that, and people are out with their dogs. Some people are running it. And just really, I get to appreciate that. If you put it in place and it was community driven, they're going to use it. And that's really great feeling. But thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Mick. I love seeing this formula and hearing you talk a little bit more about it. I think it is so great. To a lot of communities, organizations, I think, could kind of follow that same formula as they move forward with outdoor recreation. And so before we move into our next Mentimeter poll, I just wanted to share that some of the top issues that communities are facing that you all were able to fill out in that poll was number one, housing. I feel like this is an issue that we are seeing, not just across Wyoming and Colorado, but across our all of the states. It's a large topic of conversations, but that was the top one, housing. The next one was workforce development, followed by all the others. And then again, if I said it in the chat, but if you clicked other on there of your list of issues, if you could please put what that issue is into the chat, that would be great, just so we can kind of keep track about, what are some of the other issues that communities feel like that they are facing. And so with that, we will be moving into our next Mentimeter poll whenever we'll be dropping that into the chat. And so this one is on what resources do you all need as communities, as organizations, as individuals, looking to continue to develop these outdoor recreation projects and ideas that you have. But what are some of the lack of resources that you're seeing? So that is our next Mentimeter poll question. So please make sure that you are filling that out. I think one of you has dropped that link in there, as well as if you are using the QR codes, it is available right here. But with that, I will turn it on over. Our next presenter is Brad Bauer. He is the Executive Director of the Sheridan Community Land Trust. So with that, I will turn it on over to you, Brad.
Thanks, Haley. Thanks for having us to this. Yeah, Sheridan Community Land Trust. We're based in Sheridan County, which is in Wyoming. We're a northern county. We border Montana to the north. And many of you might know Land Trust for the conservation work that they do generally across the country. But we do work in 3 areas with our organization. We work in conservation, but we also have history mission that we work in and recreation mission. We're kind of a smaller group. There's staff of 6, but we try to help our community in many different ways. And I'll focus on recreation though for this. last year we had 28 community events and a whole bunch of our community was able to attend. So the next slide, please. So conservation, that's part of what we do. It's conservation easements. We work with private landowners on wildlife projects and a variety of other things as well. Next slide. Historic preservation, we're relevant to our community in that through mostly telling historic stories. And we do some historic preservation on some key buildings around the community. Then the next slide. But this is what we're here for, right? Is access to recreation. And that's probably, I would say, of the 3 areas that my organization works in, it's probably the biggest number of community members participate with my organization through access to recreation. So if I do the next slide. So access to recreation. Over the years, the Sheridan Community Land Trust we've been able to create 28 miles of hiking, biking, and equestrian trail. And this is what we call success. You know, we're still building, so the success isn't done. But it's more than just 28 miles of hiking, biking, and equestrian trail. It's places that we're using as classrooms. It's places that are available for members of our community to do service on. Our hiking trails, our biking trails, our equestrian trails are on a mix of public and private lands. We have a red grade trail system, which is in the Bighorn Mountains. It's mostly on BLM, state, and Forest Service lands. Our Soldier Ridge Trail system is right adjacent to the community of Sheridan, and that's on a mixture of city of Sheridan and private lands, private ranches. And then our last hiking biking trail is our Malcolm Mullet Park Trail, which is on a city of Sheridan property. In addition to hiking, biking, and equestrian, we've developed a water trail system, our Tongue River Water Trail system, which is again mostly on public land, but some private property. We've assisted in developing pathways, creating recreation trail opportunities through developing trail site guides, bird and plant guides. We spent time identifying routes for gravel riding as well. We do treat these classrooms or these trails as classrooms through guided walks. You might be able to come and join us for a walk on geology or local history, or maybe you're going to come for one of our trail walks and do yoga or do art. So we try to think pretty broadly about what access to recreation is and how our trails can fit into that. Over the years, we've learned strategies as we're developing these recreation opportunities, how to be relevant to our community. You know, hiking, biking, and equestrian is a big use of our trails, but we also talk about you might use those trails to look for plants or animals, or maybe you're using them as places to read or do yoga or take picnics with your family, education groups. Maybe you're out there to look at the night stars, or maybe you're just there for physical and mental health, which is more and more important every year for all of us. And we always highlight that they're free and open to the public. Another strategy that we've found with our trails is nobody cares that we built 28 miles of trail. They want to know what you can see for the first half mile. You know, they only have time, or maybe they just have the ability to walk that first half mile. But we really focus on having some sort of experience, whether it's a view or a picnic table or a bench that you can enjoy if you only have time for half a mile for an adventure. A lot of our trails have bikes on them, but they're not all bike trails. Don't just build bike trails. There's some folks who just, you know, don't want to have that experience. And there's always chances with the trails that are open to bikes to have a more advanced line or more advanced cyclists right adjacent to the more intermediate line. So you're having chances for families or for folks to learn and to grow in their skill set. And we help try to shepherd that growth of skills. We hold a series of activities called our discovery sessions, and they've covered everything from learning how to mountain bike ride, which that third photo to the right was with the young father and his young child. We've had discovery sessions on trail running, discovery sessions on women's backcountry skills, caving, introduction to caving. So we even have done discovery sessions on recreation access on activities that aren't even available on our trails. There's no caves along our trails, but there's caves around the area. And we have an opportunity to help people gain that skill set that then they can enjoy on their own. As we've built these trails and built this recreation program that is a success, but has more successes to come, we've learned experiences and I have some hindsight, I guess, to share. Don't make your maps, don't make the lines on your trail maps too big, especially when you're first creating a concept. Don't make the bowl of spaghetti look like it's just full of spaghetti noodles. It's overwhelming. People see the thick lines on the map and they think of all of the trail. They think the trail is going to be 20 feet or 40 feet or 100 feet wide, when in reality it's going to be, 18 inches, 36 inches. Build slow and under promise on what you can do. Over the time that we've built these 28 miles and all these other recreation opportunities, we've seen staff turnover. We've seen snow come in at bad times to slow development of our contractors. We've seen fire come through and change what we could build. And we've had to make realignments, which sometimes with public partners and private partners just take time. So build slow and under promise on what you're going to be able to get done. So when you can complete sections for the community, it's a celebration. Find your partners. For us, the county has been a fantastic partner. They have a county comprehensive plan that identified recreation as a priority. And so we had a great opportunity to partner with a public entity right out of the gate. And it's okay to say no to things. It's okay to hand off parts of recreation to other entities. We don't do trail races. We're glad to partner with other entities that want to do trail races. We have handed off opportunities to do construction funding with other entities. We haven't built a yoga platform despite being asked to build a yoga platform. So it's okay to say no. Maybe we'll get to it eventually. Maybe some other entity can do it and have that success as well. Some of the critical factors that we've seen with our success over the years is that we stay neutral to other entities' projects. It's really easy as we've grown in success and relevancy, I hope, to our community. It's easy for folks to look to us to come out in opposition or in favor of their project. And we generally try to stay neutral of that. And it's paid dividends for us. It's already a tight road to walk. You're threading that needle and you don't need to be playing in other people's projects if you can avoid it. We try to fundraise from the many. We have lots of wide community support. That second picture in from the left, that was a discovery session walk of folks learning about geology. I hope every single one of those folks is a supporter of the Community Land Trust. But we know that even though we're seeking funding from the many, we need to find key matching funding. So, get a few foundations or community grants that you can leverage support to your community so that they see that their dollars are going further than what they can contribute. Again, don't build too fast on your community trails. We have done that in the past. We built too fast, got over our skis, so to speak, on maintenance. So just catch up on maintenance. Don't focus always on what's new, but provide a quality experience from what you've already built. Use your volunteers meaningfully. We've had experiences where we had volunteers out just because we thought we should. We needed a community volunteer day. And volunteer times is important, and they want to make sure that they're giving meaningful contribution to your community trails or your community recreation. For us, it's such a small team, it's important to support your staff, get them the new tools that they need, find them help when they need it, pay them well, and always celebrate them whenever, wherever you can. And mostly for us, telling our story over and over again. Things like this, or in front of our county commissioners, to our city, to small groups, to the Lions Club, to the Rotary. Tell your story over and over again. Get the credit where you deserve, because you do deserve plenty of credit in each one of your projects, but be happy to share that credit when somebody else deserves it as well. That's it. That's all I had. I was short maybe, but hopefully there's something there. And if you want to find us, we're at Sheridan CLT as in communitylandtrust.org.
Thank you so much, Brad, for sharing all of your amazing insights. I think that you guys do some really amazing work up in Sheridan, and it's so interesting to hear about, kind of things that you've seen work well and other things that you have noticed, hey, maybe we didn't need to have that volunteer day, or maybe we need to think about how we're redoing this, and really how you're working with partners and working with your community. So thank you again for being here. On that last Menti poll, when we asked you guys about some resources that you would need in your communities, some of the things that we saw were information on convening public support and getting public participation. I know that, many of what you've heard about in those last three presenters is how they've been able to really, pull the public together, pull participation. But we all know that sometimes that can be a little bit difficult, especially in smaller communities throughout both Wyoming and Colorado. Also, other resources, things on funding, those kinds of things, those are some issues that we've seen come up multiple times throughout all of these webinars that we've had. But we have our next and our last Menti poll. So this one is on how universities and extension can support communities looking to implement, add, and expand outdoor recreation. So again, I am with the University of Wyoming, Guinevere is with CSU. And so we are trying to see how we can best support these communities throughout both of our states in having to add and implement outdoor recreation. And so again, please feel free to use the QR code or use the link that Guinevere just dropped into the chat and add your answers into the Menti. But with that, I will turn it over to our last presenter, Sarah Ott. She is the city manager with the city of Aspen. We are very excited to have Sarah here. She has a great presentation, as well as she shared a link with me to a video. So I will be dropping that in the chat as well for you all to see when we are off the webinar.
Great. Thanks so much, Haley. Really enjoyed hearing the information from all the presenters today. Brad, this notion of discovery sessions, we use those as a community engagement strategy when we're trying to figure out challenges around land. So it's a great strategy, and it's great. I'm just happy to hear you're using it as someone who would visit Sheridan pretty regularly when I had family in the area. I've been here in the city of Aspen since 2017, and I will just tell you the rural resort experience has changed a lot over the last few years, particularly with the impacts of the pandemic. And I have a few things here that I will cover, but I am just hearing the interest around the issues of housing and workforce development. I will delve into those a little bit as well and go faster through other material for the group. So if we wouldn't mind jumping to the next slide, just a friendly reminder, what is Aspen, the authenticity of Aspen? We are a world-class skiing destination in the winter, but we are also a world-class arts and culture-oriented community. So we're one of the few rural resorts in the country that has a AAA bond rating due to the strength of our year-round tourism economy. Not a very common thing to find, and it was quite the challenge to get that AAA bond rating. But it's to pay dividends back to the community and money saved when it's borrowed for major capital projects. I'll talk with you a little bit about lessons learned with tourist and community expectations, some examples that worked, jump into that housing and some Q&A. Next slide, please. So lessons learned as mature resort destination. Is that really it's a shared commitment to protecting Aspen's environment and community. So when that happens, it's important to recognize that how do you educate your guest population so that it's a positive experience with them, with the locals, and the locals have a positive experience with the guests coming in. Super important, because if there's animosity there, then it really will delay any of your development efforts to build this portion of your economy. Secondly, just how essential data is to these conversations when they're at a community level. So I've given you some examples here. We look at resident surveys, industry roundtables, guest surveys, average daily room rates is a really key one we pay attention to as well. Guest counts, vehicle counts, pedestrian counts, all of those kinds of things that help us understand how these guests are moving through our community, and therefore how can we improve their experience as well as manage the fact that we are still a year-round community that has people who are here every day wanting to move forward. And we work to attract guests that align with the community values. So we have about a $3.5 million budget just for destination marketing in Aspen. That's a tax on the hotel and lodging stays in the community that generate that money every year. And so there's lots of different ways that those funds could be spent. And we've been really deliberate with our partners at our destination marketing group that we're attracting folks who match the community's values around protection of our wild places. And then when you are developing into a resort destination, you got to remember taking care about the social, emotional, and housing needs of your year-round residents and your workforce residents who might be with you just part of the year. I can't emphasize enough how much work local communities have to do in that space to support their tourism economy as their economy is maturing and growing. And if you grow too fast and you're not dealing with the social, emotional, or housing needs, you're not setting up a sustainable economy for your community moving forward. Next slide, please. So one of the things, could you see, will this play? Because I embedded it with the high. Okay, it's not going to. Okay, so one of the key features in Aspen is how do you create that value alignment with the guests? And so we'll drop the video in the chat, but one of the things I wanted to share as an example is what we called the Aspen Pledge. It's about shared expectations as a local and as a guest. And it's a little tongue in cheek, and that's intentional. It tells us things like I'll carve snow, but not trees. Things of that nature that just help emphasize about what that experience is. So why would any guest even bother to pay attention to this? Well, if you're doing a good job and who you're recruiting, they're making an emotional attachment to your sense of place, right? There's something they love about coming to your community, to your activities that brings meaning to them. And in this particular case, when you sign the Aspen Pledge, and it has about 12 different areas to it about your conduct, that you get to choose a local nonprofit that we will make an $18.80 contribution to out of those tourism marketing dollars. And so therefore, there's a way we've introduced some of our nonprofit partners that are important to stewarding our natural environment, and at the same time are gaining those behavioral expectations in the community from the guest and from the local. This is just how we do it here in Aspen with our destination marketing partners over at the Chamber Resort Association. Other great examples of this work are Love Wanaka and Love QT, which are both in the South Island of New Zealand. It's one of the comparable communities that Aspen looks at pretty regularly because we have very similar challenges that we're working on. If you would go to the next slide, please. All right. So we have a lot of hotel rooms and a lot of Airbnbs, short-term rentals in Aspen. So one of the ways that we have recognized that we can make an impact is supporting elevating the hospitality experience through those concierge services. And this is, easy as a front desk, anything like that, and training. But it's like, how do you help disperse hikers? And simple questions like, oh, when did you arrive to town? Where are you from? We'll let you know pretty quickly without a judgmental conversation around, are you dealing with someone from a flatlander, as we call them, who's only been here for 24 hours, who really should not take a hike that has 3,000 feet of vertical gain in the first 2 miles. Right? So those kind of doing some of that training with those hospitality industry staff is really helpful into making a quality guest experience, but also then placing our guests into recommendations that fit where they're at. Why is this really important? Because when these guests maybe go beyond their needs, and their capabilities, the impact on the public safety services, particularly our mountain rescue services, is really intense. And while they're highly qualified and highly trained, they're all volunteer. They all have other full-time commitments in the community. And it's one of those things, if we can prevent putting our volunteers in those dangerous rescue situations by having prepared guests, we find it the best. Last thing is we offer community history training. And it's done through like a 1-hour comedy theatrical production, right? So it's memorable, and understanding what the Aspen ideal means, understanding the mining history of the community where our rural roots are, understanding that this is the place that was known as the Shining Mountains of multiple native hunting tribelands. Next slide, please. So another big thing for us here is transportation, and I'm going to shorten these slides together. The first one here is exploring Aspen on 2 wheels. This was a specific campaign focused at tourists renting bicycles and e-bikes who maybe really, one, don't know how to ride an e-bike, don't really understand the power of e-bikes and the stopping of e-bikes, right? We were seeing a big uptick in our local hospital of injuries for our guests related to e-bike accidents. So we actually put into place, with support of our local bike rental entities, there's a required affidavit signed by every renter and rider. And it also includes watching about a 5-minute educational video about how to explore Aspen on 2 wheels. How do you get from here to a very famous area called the Maroon Bells? That can be a little difficult to navigate. And how do you do that directly? How do you not get hit by a car in our core? Like, right, some of those really fundamental things that, you know, we don't want to have a poor guest experience around. Next slide, please. The next big thing is sustainable transportation options for us. We are our partners in the largest rural transportation agency in the United States, with over 1 million riders a year. And what we do here is a few things. Is first of all is using sustainable transportation options, so fully electric buses as much as we can. We provide priority for bus transportation in our road network. We offer fare-free service. That is the #1 thing to making it happen, is finding a different way to fund this. In Aspen, how do we fund it? Parking revenues. So our parking revenues pay for our public transit system. There's some sales tax that's additional, but that has been a huge point of benefit that connects to our workforce from here to about 1.5 hours away. All can take transit. Now, it's not free to 1.5 hours away. We're trying to find out how to make it free for that workforce. But most often, employers are covering those bus passes for those employees as a benefit in the interim step of this. And of course, we also want, if you're going to drive, we want it the most sustainable option possible. So we have a pretty aggressive electric vehicle charging infrastructure plan that we've been implementing for the past few years. I want to back up a little bit. You can drop the slides now. On the housing and on the workforce development components that came out in an early mentee survey. Thank you so much for doing that as our facilitators. On the housing front, the city of Aspen has 3,000 housing units it oversees that are deed restricted affordable housing that require people to work at least 1,500 hours per year within our county to be eligible for it. There's also a sliding income component to eligibility as well. It's taken us 50 years to get to this point, and it's not perfect, but we made progress. We did it through a couple of different ways. First of all, we started mandating mitigation and new development. So mitigation could have been money, mitigation could be creating units. We also created an incentive program, it's called a credits program, for the private sector to build affordable housing and then be able to sell that credit to another development coming in that doesn't want to pay the money or build the unit themselves. We also have some local taxes because it's a strong community belief in affordable housing that Aspen should have an entire socioeconomic spectrum to be a full community. That has been a really key part of that as well. So happy to go into detail more about that. We also use a lot of partners in the housing area. I'll give you a great example right now is we've been working with the U.S. Forest Service on redevelopment of one of their administrative properties to add in 55 community housing units in exchange for building them housing units for their employees. Right. And so things like that, as I think everyone on this panel can attest, is the Forest Service, BLM, they are great partners. However, it's very unusual for them to bring substantial dollars to a conversation, just given the nature of the federal government climate around resources in this area. So the ways that we can support them and in turn they can have the workforce that they need to maintain our public lands has been a key part of our wild place protection strategy. We also work really closely with our local community college around workforce development. And so our local community college over the years has done everything from the avalanche training for the community, does if you want to be a lift mechanic, you can get that training right here in our valley. The hospitality sector, you can get that training right here in that valley. And by the way, those can be 4-year degrees, right? It is a full college experience and education. And that has been something that's taken a long time. We're really fortunate that Colorado Mountain College, our community partner, does do a lot of listening and asking, how can we help our community? And so that's why we have a great amount of healthcare professionals throughout our valley, things of that nature that are really essential to creating community while building some of these other tourism economy aspects. So I'll stop there. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your insights. It is always so great to learn about all the amazing things that you guys are doing in Aspen. I dropped the link to the pledge for Aspen in the chat. So if you have some time, please feel free to look at that. It is a really amazing video. It is such a unique idea, and I really love that. But again, thank you all of our presenters for sharing a little bit more about your organizations, your communities, and kind of some of those lessons learned that you've seen throughout the years. But with that, now with our last 25-ish minutes, we are going to jump into our Q&A section of this webinar. So we have some prepared questions. There were also some that have come in over the last few days from some registrants. So I'm going to be throwing those out there. These are going to be open to all of our panelists as well. I might kick off a few to one person or another just to start the conversation off, but they are open to all of you. So please feel free to chime in with your thoughts. As well as if there's any other questions that arise from our participants, please feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A, and we will throw those in there as best we can and hopefully get through as many of these questions. But so to start this off, and I think I am going to kick this on over to Mark first. But one of our first questions was, what steps did you take to ensure the community felt included and invested in your project since you've worked with so many communities?
Sure, Haley. So one of the first things that we did when we approached the county commissioners and the city council with the accessibility into and out of communities was we worked with the landowners. Since the SWAP project is primarily on the county road system, the county commissioners asked us to engage landowners, and I had 2 separate landowner meetings inviting ranchers, landowners, and the public to attend. One was in Bridger Valley and one was in Evanston. Both of these happened right during COVID, so it did present some challenges, but had about 50 people at one meeting and 70 people at the other one. And, you know, their first question is, are you bringing a bunch of riders in to just come in and tear up the county road system? And really the answer is no. The county road system had, you know, and the public right of way for that matter had been developed, you know, throughout the country for many years for any type of vehicle use, whether it's a logging truck, a oil-filled truck, a school bus, a Jeep, an RV, a motorcycle. You know, that public road system has been used as a backbone for transportation for into and out of the communities, you know, for the better part of a century. And so to say, hey, you can't use the public road system for OHVs, but you could use it for Jeeps or e-bikes or whatever, really wasn't practical. And we had some meetings with the county attorney specifically regarding this, but asked the public to bring those concerns. And, once we addressed them in those public meetings, it was really just a matter of time before they kind of, they weren't jumping up and down saying that they were excited about it, but they understood it more that, the public right of way is the same thing that you could do moving sheep up and down the county road system, the same way you could, use a RV to go, from place to place. And by engaging, the landowners, the public, and having them, it just gives us an opportunity to educate them on what the whole project was about. It would have been a little different for us to try and say, hey, we want to make it from point A to point B in our communities by, trying to work with the landowner and run a trail up through a meadow, but it just really was not practical or feasible. So it kind of presented itself early on that the most logical way for us to access communities was the existing asset of public roads. And, once people understood that, people, came to that realization that it was, it kind of, fell in line with what their idea of what we were trying to do was. I hope that kind of answered the question.
Yeah, thank you for those insights, Mark. I guess I'll open it up to the other panelists. Are there any ways that you guys feel that your communities or organizations have been able to ensure that those communities felt included and invested in the projects that you were doing?
Community meetings. I mean, most of our projects would have community meetings, or on the federal lands, NEPA, which has all sorts of public comment on. The opposite, with one of the revisions of the Sheridan County Comprehensive Plan, there was a dotted line on a map indicating a potential future trail connection to the mountains, and it was hypothetical, but sure, that landowner underneath that hypothetical line was not pleased to see that. So, carefulness with maps and getting ahead of any map with a conversation is always important.
Yeah, I'll just back that up what Brad said. We've had that exact same thing happen where, we sketched some lines on a map as some possibilities, only to have that really blow up. I think, getting back to Mark's point, like really work with the community, the stakeholders, whether that's landowners or whoever it may be, to be involved in the planning, and then be really cautious with maps until it's really time to talk about it.
Great, thank you guys for giving those great insights. It looks like we had a question come in for Sarah directly, but also if you guys have any other insights for your communities about this question as well, please feel free to jump in. But this question for Sarah, it says, I seem to always hear how the lack of affordable housing options are in Aspen, with a large percentage of Aspen's workforce having to commute from Glenwood Springs every day. How are you addressing your local economy and workforce housing needs? What can you do more of?
Yeah, so all of the folks on this call represent very desirable places to live. So anyone who thinks you can solve affordable housing in these very desirable places is a little misguided. It is never a solving situation. It's always a building and balancing growth with community values around growth. So there's a few things. For example, I have about a $400 million project I'm working on right now to add over 300 units that'll be delivered in the next 5 years. I really don't like including my own city workforce having to commute an hour and a half each way in the good weather on the bus to get to work. And so we have an ethical responsibility and moral responsibility to provide opportunities as close as we can to those employment opportunities. And so that's why we have 3,000 units. You just heard about 300 more that will be online pretty quickly. for us to help address that. It reduces congestion. We actually provide deed restricted affordable housing up to 240% AMI. So that, if you don't know, that's a lot. We need to provide affordable housing for doctors, nurses, teachers, plow drivers, a lot of people who keep the community ticking every day. And that's okay. The community has accepted that it's created two housing markets. And quite frankly, the more expensive free market housing units pay for the affordable housing because we tax the transaction of those sales. And that has been a huge part of why we've been able to accomplish what we've accomplished. So I am always looking for land to buy for the future that could be for either preservation of open spaces or affordable housing, or often they're actually combined.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Sarah. I completely agree with what you said, that, you know, these are issues that are not solved overnight, and they also are not, you know, one size fit all for all these different communities, and especially in all of these really great, desirable places. You know, we in Wyoming, Colorado are all very blessed with have such amazing, you know, recreation opportunities, such amazing places to live in. But it does cause some issues as well. So thank you for sharing that insight, Sarah. One question that I'm going to just throw out into all of the groups, so whoever would like to chime in first, please feel free to do so. But one question that came in was, how did you handle opposition or skepticism from community members during projects?
I'll jump on that. It's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of field visits together. It's a lot of understanding the whys for multiple viewpoints to see if there's a shared path forward or if there's not, right? And what does that mean for the project? So that's typically my strategy, is a lot of listening, active listening to a lot of those views. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I'll jump in, Haley. So, I mean, I think there's two extremes. You know, one of the extremes is you've got small business owners who are doing everything they can to scrape by and rub two nickels together to try and sell a t-shirt. And then you've got another place that's got, you know, multi-million-dollar clients coming in on a daily basis. And, you know, these smaller communities are really looking for a way to at least have some economic viability. And an easy way to do that is to tap into those historical and cultural and recreational resources that are in and around those communities. And if you can bring some of those, you know, business owners to the table to say, hey, we could use some more traffic on weekends, or we need some more people, you know, staying at our lodge or our hotel or anything like that. You know, that speaks volumes to the other community members. It's not just always, you know, our nonprofit up there tooting our horn saying, you know, this is what we want to do to bring people into the area. This is really got to be the stakeholders at the ground level saying, hey, we need this. And nobody's saying, hey, we want to be like Moab overnight. You know, they're dealing with their own challenges, like many of those resort communities and you know, big recreation communities are. But you know, we're decades behind that, and we're not saying we want to turn that, you know, any of our projects into that overnight, but we do need more traffic for other economic opportunities in Wyoming, especially in these very small communities.
Great, thank you for that, Mark.
I would echo what Sarah said, and, you know, just conversations and compromising, giving on parts of projects where you can give or change or completely redo, you know, do it if you can. And then what Mick was sharing in his presentation, pick those easy small wins that can show success, make the fear disappear, or at least lessen it some. And maybe you'll turn some of those opposition voices, at least neutral, maybe even into supportive.
Over time, I've had some really funny instances with that. Right when I took the job, I had a guy whose name was Mick, actually, too, so that made things really confusing. But he would send me like two 3-page emails in the middle of the night, diatribes about why we shouldn't do what we're doing. And then one of my crew members actually ran into him one day out on the trail that he was using, walking his dog on, to tell me that that trail had already been there. And there had been an old user path there, but he was happy with the old user path and not, other trails. And I think we run into this, right, where people are not in my backyard or not in the place that I recreate, because that's my special place. And, a lot of times those voices are really emboldened. And I think having those community meetings where the community is all there together. This last summer, I was in an instance where, a gentleman stood up and proclaimed that no one in the room wanted this project to happen, which led to about, 70-75% of the room, standing up and, basically saying, no, we do want this to happen. Like, this needs to move forward. This is the best thing that could happen to us. And so, it's great. People need a platform to be able to speak. But, I think a lot of times they actually haven't just heard the community's desire and need for the project, or their neighbor or their friend, someone they know that would really like to see it happen. But definitely, they need the platform to speak. If you're not providing that, you're just basically, providing a place for it to begin to boil. And so don't be afraid to function within democracy and have a conversation with people you might not normally engage with.
Great. Thank you guys for, excuse me, all of those great insights. I think that, when we are met with that opposition or some of that skepticism, it can be difficult, especially trying to move forward. But it is a lot about just having those conversations and opening up that line of communication. So thank you all for sharing that. Our next question, and so it's kind of directed a little bit more towards Brad, so I'm going to kick it off to Brad first, but then I would love to hear from all the rest of you as well. But what came in was, what's your approach to balancing economic development through outdoor recreation with conservation efforts?
Sure. That's a great question. I was trying to think, actually, similar thought was bouncing around in my head as I was listening to Mick just talk. Man, it's hard. There is recreation doesn't need to happen everywhere, but recreation is important for local economies. It's local for these small communities to be able to thrive, which then also has the challenge of over-loving places, because now you have invited more people to come, and I don't think there's a simple answer to that, but we have certainly taken the approach of, because my organization has 3 missions that we work in, wherever possible, we're excited to have history preservation, land conservation, and access to recreation occur on one property, but it's never an expectation. And so when there are a few properties that we can highlight that we're doing all 3 of those things on, but most of the places that we're working are focusing on 1 or maybe 2 of those goals for our community. But I think there is also chances within recreation, and this leads into our discovery sessions that we do, of increasing that conservation ethic, or that land care for land and care for each other, even through some of the workshops and classes that we put on, that hopefully folks can be better stewards of as a recreationist and a more ethical recreationalist on other properties. But we know it's imperfect, and it's usually the 1 person out of 100 that somebody remembers who left the gate open or littered at the trailhead. So it's a never-ending job, but hopefully we're approaching it in enough different angles that we can help that next generation be the best steward of the lands going forward.
Great, thank you, Brad. I'll open that up to the other panelists as well. In your work and in your communities, what has been your approach to balancing this economic development through outdoor recreation with conservation efforts as well?
I can jump in there. In Colorado Parks and Wildlife started an initiative, I guess really back in 2020, through what was called the Colorado Outdoor Partnerships, to develop regional partnerships throughout the state. And so San Luis Valley Great Outdoors is the regional partner with Colorado Parks and Wildlife for the San Luis Valley. And so the whole priority is about balancing conservation and recreation. And so we're in a number of different things. You know, it's really easy actually when we're working with our federal partners, right? Because we're going to go through some NEPA process in that point. Actually, the majority of our work though has been on city and county land over the last 4 years, especially new trail development, trying to put recreation in town for people. And so we have been very fortunate to have those good relationships with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and other NGOs and nonprofits that have been able to guide us and be partners at the table. I think our new work has really moved into, conservation mapping throughout the whole San Luis Valley, so that really as a tool, so that, in this 8,000 square mile valley, we're not intentionally doing any harm by adding a new trail system, and that's everything from Southwest willow flycatcher, which is an endangered species, to elk migrations and mule deer migrations, and what impact that will have with the trails, and working with our CPW officer to say yay or nay, or in some instances, we have seasonal closures now to make sure we're not disturbing mule deer or elk during breeding seasons in those particular areas. And so it's a big conversation. We're now also actually beginning to work on mobile phone data, trying to understand a little bit more about where people are going, because we know there are areas that, your average recreationist, like a hunter or a trail runner, or fishermen, may not be using. Maybe there's an old cow path that mountain bikers have found, and that has now become a user trail. I've seen the same thing with hunting, where there isn't a legal trail on the system, but hunters use the area so much for access that has now become a trail. And then suddenly you find, people on horseback on it, people mountain biking on it, motorcycles using it, and it's actually not a legal system trail. And so, we're working through all of that. It's a big, broad valley. And, we're holding the table to continue to have the conversation so that we are protecting, the area, and ideally using trails to move people and tourists to particular areas that, and I don't like the word sacrificial areas, but, we're certainly like moving people to certain areas so that we can protect other areas at the same time.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Mick. I know we are coming close to the end of our webinar, but I wanted to pose this one last question to you all. And I know that we didn't get through all of the questions, but there's been so many great ones. But my last question I would love to hear from all of you is that when you hear our topic of lessons learned, what would you say has been the biggest or most impactful lesson learned for your community or your organization?
I'm unmuted and I can make it fast.
Great.
Just that it absolutely can happen, despite the naysayers or whatever, it can happen. Things can happen. New trails can go in place. New parks can be created. Land can be bought for people to experience the outdoors on.
I would say that just, work with stakeholders in collaboration and bring people to the table. If you want to have the most amount of traction on a project, don't make it just your project. Bring other people on board with you. A lot of voices help tell the story.
Find ways to be relevant to your community. You're serving your community, and that will guide you to maybe some unlikely partnerships, some unlikely wins that you can. And I guess also rely on other communities. Look at what other communities have done. We don't have to create the wheel together, or it's already been created. You can just borrow good ideas and apply them to your community.
Yeah, I just add to all this that definitely you need to look for the wins and not get too hung up on when it's not going the right way in your eyes. The community has a voice, and the community is going to use it, and you have to balance your advocacy, advising, roles very carefully, depending upon what seat you sit in the community. And so I think that these are all really successful examples here today. And all of them took a lot of passion and hard work. And that was a really key part in getting the communities well moved forward.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on that last question. I know that I have learned a lot from all of you today, and I'm sure that there are many other communities and organizations who have jumped on this webinar today and think, oh, okay, I'm not the only one, or some different lessons to be learned. So thank you all for sharing that. I also wanted to say thank you to all who participated today and contributing to this very important conversation. Thank you for going through our Menti polls as well as interacting with our panelists. We hope that this discussion has really given you some good insights to lessons learned throughout both Colorado and Wyoming. The recording of this webinar will be available on our website by next week. So if you have any further questions or would like any follow-ups, please feel free to get a hold of myself or Guinevere. There will also be an email coming out to you tomorrow with our contact information as well as a survey on if there was anything else that you would like to see during these webinars. Thank you all for going through our technical difficulties with the videos. Those will also be linked into the website as well with this presentation, so you can be able to see all of those great videos that our presenters shared. So again, thank you all. Have a good rest of your day and Happy New Year again.
Thank you.